Hello, folks, and welcome back to the Catholic OCD Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nolfi. Today, we are going to talk about Mary. What is it that Catholics believe about Mary? Is it biblical? Are there some Protestants who have a misunderstanding of Catholic theology about Mary? Are there certain Catholics who have a misunderstanding about the Church's theology on Mary? Stay tuned. That's the topic for today. All right, so Mary, this seems to be, I think sometimes this is, overstated as a divisive topic between Catholics and Protestants, and I really think that there's a lot of misunderstandings personally. Fix my books here. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings personally, sometimes among both sides of the Mariology about just what is it exactly that the Church teaches about Mary. So let's start off by saying what the Church doesn't teach about Mary. So Mary is not divine. I remember listening years ago, and I remember a guy, I was listening to a Protestant radio station, and there was this guy that came on, and he was basically warning people to have fellowship with Catholics because he said that the Catholic Church was thinking about adding Mary to the Trinity, basically making her the fourth person of the Trinity, which obviously wouldn't be called a Trinity then. I don't know what you would even call it, quadrolatry or whatever it would be. I mean, that's honestly something that's just laughable. And you really hate to call people dumb. But let's just say that guy is not smart. That is really stupid to say. The Church does not view Mary as divine. She will never be divine. She will always be understood as a created being, not a creator. Period. Our understanding of the Trinity, or somehow adding an extra person into the essence of God, the Church doesn't get to do that. That's just bad. But there are a lot of people who talk about Mary, and they think that really the Church, the Catholic Church, or maybe even the Orthodox Church, worships Mary. And this has to be understood as not true. There's a distinction in Catholicism. There's what's known as latria. So latria is basically the word that means worship. And worship, or latria, according to Catholicism, is only to be given to Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It's only for God. God is the only being who can be worshipped. Now, there is what's known as dulia. And dulia is this veneration. And Catholicism does teach that we can venerate the saints. We can give this honor, this position of gratitude, this position of where we look at people and we want to imitate them. We can give this to the saints. The saints cannot be worshipped. No, because all of the saints, like us, are all created beings. So they can never be worshipped, but they can be honored. Mary is given what's known as in Catholicism as the she's able to be given what's known as hyperdulia. And hyperdulia basically means it's the highest form of veneration, this highest form of honor that is not worship. So, one of the ways to understand this, and I will stress this, in order to really understand the Catholic Church's view of Mary, you really have to see Mary in the Old Testament. Because I would argue that maybe more of our theology of Mary comes from the Old Testament than the New Testament. Because Catholicism really does read the scriptures like this, Old and New Testament going together. Not just this one continuous story, but that the New Testament is hidden in the Old Testament and that the Old Testament is fulfilled in the New Testament. This all is tied into this theology known as typology, which means that there are these types of stuff in the Old Testament that will be fulfilled in the New Testament. Example, we would understand that the manna that came down from heaven was a type of Eucharist. The Holy Spirit hovering over the waters of creation, or the dove over the waters at Noah's flood, or even as the Israelites went through the Red Sea, these are all types of or foreshadowings of baptism. We understand clearly that there is types of Jesus all throughout the Old Testament. You know, Jesus has to be the new Adam. Jesus fulfills the law and the teachings of Moses. You know, Joseph from the Old Testament was a type of Christ. We see all of this, even the ram that was caught in the thorns with Abraham and Isaac. That's a foreshadowing of Christ. Well, there are these typology things when it comes to Mary also. And that's what I want us to be able to focus on today. I'm really going to try to describe the Catholic theology of Mary from a biblical point of view. Now, you might listen to me and say, like, hear what I have to say, hear what the Catholic Church has to say, or understanding and interpretation of Scripture. You could say, well, I don't believe any of that. That doesn't make sense to me. I think that's a stretch. I don't, whatever. And that's your right. But at least I think it's fair to hear out where the church says, or where we get what we believe from the Bible about Mary. Keep in mind these three things that we have to understand that the church does not believe about Mary. Mary is, again, not divine. She's not God. She is a creature. Number two, Mary cannot be worshipped. And number three, Mary has no power in and of herself. Jesus does. The Holy Spirit does. God the Father does. The Trinity has power. They receive the light from themselves. Mary, like all of us, are dependent on everything we do. We are dependent on the empowerment of God. We are all vessels. We are all tools used by God. We do not generate the light or love or truth of God from within ourselves. So understand all of this first, okay? So the first thing I want to cover is the church's understanding of Mary as the new Eve. I really am convinced biblically of this concept. We understand that Jesus is the new Adam. We understand that that's perfectly biblical because the Bible actually says that. Paul actually describes Christ as the new Adam in Romans. But what connections do we see? Well, we see that Adam was a man who through his pride wanted to be like God. Jesus has to undo this. Jesus is God, but through his humility, he becomes man. Adam brings us all death by his choice from the tree. Jesus brings us all life by his choice from the tree, dying on the tree. Adam is given the punishment or the curses of sweat, thorns, death. By the sweat of his brow, he would get food. The earth is cursed with thorns, and man will die. Jesus has to take all of these on, right? So Jesus sweats blood in the garden before he's arrested. Jesus has thorns jammed onto his skull. Jesus dies. He takes on all of these curses. He has to fulfill them. Where Adam brings us death, now Christ will bring us life. We all understand that from a biblical point of view. But now let's focus not so much on Adam, but on Eve. We understand that the credit for salvation goes to Christ. Just like really the credit from the punishment of death goes and gets attributed to Adam. At the end of the day, Adam, not Eve, but Adam is who is really held responsible for the death of mankind. Yet we understand Eve was involved. So what do we know about Eve? Well, number one, Eve is created directly from the DNA of Adam. So you think about this. Eve has no other DNA. She has no other lineage. She has no other bloodline inside of her that does not come directly from Adam. She only is made up of the DNA that Adam has. This is why when Adam sees Eve, he calls her woman. Why does he give her the name woman? He's not being, chauvinistic. He's not being, a punk. He's not like, woman, make me a sandwich right now. He's calling her woman. This is very much this title of honor because Adam says, you are truly bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Adam and Eve, the first Adam and Eve, are 2 out of 4 people total in the Bible who will actually be able to say that they only share each other's DNA. This is the first Adam and the first Eve. Now, we understand that in the New Testament, there also is a set of a male and a female who can say the same thing. And they are the only ones in the New Testament that can say the same thing. Who are they? Well, it's the new Adam and it's the new Eve. Jesus, and this is not up for debate because it cannot be argued. It cannot be said like, oh, well, that's wrong, Nick, what you're saying, because this is 100% true from the Bible. The fact of the matter is, Jesus has no other DNA, no other bloodline than what he has received from his mother, from Mary. Jesus does not have, half of his bloodline comes from his mother and half of his bloodline comes from his father, because his father is spirit and only his mother is flesh. His human nature is only received from his mother, from her bloodline, from her DNA. Only people that can say this is the first Adam can say this with the first Eve, and the new Adam can say this with the new Eve. Now, when you read the Gospel of John, what we're going to see here is we're going to see Mary, the new Eve. She's going to reverse something that the old Eve failed to do. What is this? The old Eve, the first Eve, she convinces the first Adam to commit his first sin. It's Eve who is duped, really, by Satan, not Adam. This is at least according to St. Paul. But what happens is Eve, once she is convinced, now she helps to push Adam into committing this sin. That would bring death to all mankind. And the first Adam, at the request of the first Eve, enters into this participation of partaking of this fruit, which then brings death to all of us. When you read the Gospel of John, you get to the wedding at Cana. And when you get to the wedding at Cana, what's happening is they're taking these clay containers, clay jars, that are full of this holy water, basically, that's going to be made for this wine for a wedding feast. So now I get this imagery of Adam and Eve and this, the first married couple. Also get in this image of creation, when we see how the earth really is then filled with water. We see this. Now, when you read the Gospel of John, it's going to also kind of back this up by saying it's the third day. And then on the third day, this is when they go to the wedding. Why is John emphasizing the third day? He's emphasizing this because it's fulfilling the creation account. We've already heard about in the beginning, like when Genesis talks about in the beginning was God. John's going to begin with in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We're going to see in creation how light is created. Then we're going to see about how Jesus is the light. He's the light of the world. Jesus is involved with everything in creation, John's going to talk about. But then we're going to get to the third day, and now we're seeing these earthly vessels, basically made out of clay, made out of earth, filled with water. This is going along still with the creation account in Genesis, and John's emphasizing this is on the third day. This is for this wedding feast. So our minds should be thinking about the original marriage of Adam and Eve. Now, when they're at the wedding, they run out of wine. And now what we're going to see is the new Eve is going to come up to Jesus. She is not going to try to convince Jesus to do his first sin like the first Eve did to the first Adam. But what she's going to do, she is going to push Jesus or request of Jesus to do his first miracle, which will reveal himself, which will begin his ministry, which will begin the time clock for his death. And Mary knows this. Mary understands that Jesus is going to die. And that when he starts his ministry, as soon as he starts it, the sooner he starts it, the sooner he will die. She understands this, and yet she pushes him towards it. Now, when you read the Gospel of John, you have two options. Jesus is going to refer to Mary as woman. He's going to say, "Woman, why do you ask me this? My hour has not yet come." You have two options. Either Jesus is being a punk. Like, picture your mom asks you something. She's like, "Billy, will you take out the trash?" "Woman, why do you ask me to take out the trash? You know I'm playing PlayStation." And your dad would be there and he would backhand you. Either this is what Jesus is doing. He just is he has no respect for women. He doesn't care if it's his mother. He's just saying, "Woman, you're embarrassing me in front of my friends at this wedding." Either that's why Jesus is calling her woman, or what Jesus is doing is he is giving her the title that Adam gave to the first Eve, which is woman, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. What Jesus is showing here is that they're at this wedding feast, and as Mary is requesting him to enter into his ministry, requesting him to do his first miracle, John is emphasizing how Jesus is referring to her as woman, showing that this is the new Eve. We're seeing the new Eve and the new Adam. And this is why he refers to her as woman. It also must be understood that Mary, just like Jesus had to take on the curses of Adam, Mary has to take on the curse of Eve. What was Eve's curse? Eve's curse was that her submission would be to the new Adam, or to the original Adam. You know, her duty would be to her husband, he would rule over her. The first Eve, one of the things that she would be submissive to the first Adam. Immediately when Jesus says, "Why do you ask me this? My hour is not yet come," Mary turns to the disciples and she just says, "Do whatever he tells you." There's this submissiveness to Jesus. The other curse that Eve was given was this pain during childbearing. This pain that she would have from being a mother. And Mary has to take this pain on in a worse way than the first Eve had to do it, because Mary will have to witness the brutal, torturous execution of her son. He will be mocked, he will be shamed, he will be betrayed, he will be tortured, he will be executed right in front of her eyes in a slow, painful death. This is the pain that she will have to take on. Mary knows this. She knows this before the wedding of Cana. She knows that this terrible thing is going to happen. How do we know this? Well, let's look at the Gospel of Luke. When you read the Gospel of Luke in the second chapter, Mary is going to take Jesus with Joseph. They're going to go to the temple to dedicate Jesus. When they go there, they meet this old man named Simeon. And Simeon has been waiting there, and he was told by God that he would not die until he sees the Messiah. And when he sees Jesus coming, he knows this is Christ. This is him. Now, when he sees Mary coming up, Simeon's going to go. He's going to take Jesus and take him in his arms. And now picture this moment. Mary's watching as this man has Jesus in his arms. And what the man says is he says, "Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word. For my eyes have seen thy salvation, which thou hast prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, and for glory to thy people Israel." So this guy is praying. He's holding Jesus. He's praying to God, saying, like, now I can die. I've seen it. I've seen this. I've seen the Messiah. He's going to bring peace to the Gentiles, salvation to God's people. And then in verse 33, it says, "And his father and mother marveled at what was said about him. And Simeon blessed them," listen to this, "and said to Mary his mother, Behold, this child is set for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign that is spoken against. And a sword will pierce through your own soul also, so that the thoughts of many out of their hearts will be revealed." So basically what Simeon's saying, picture him holding Jesus, talking about who Jesus is going to be. He's going to be the rise and fall of many, giving him back to Mary, and then telling Mary, but you know what, Mary, your heart also is going to be pierced, so that the thoughts of many hearts might be revealed. It is a biblical concept. It's a biblical teaching to understand that it was prophesied that Mary's heart would be pierced so that the thoughts of many hearts might be revealed. What does that mean? What's that mean? How is it that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed through the piercing of Mary's heart? how would Mary's heart be pierced? And we all understand that's a piercing of the heart when you're watching your son be killed slowly before you. This is the pain that Mary has to take on to fulfill the cursing that Eve brought upon all womanhood. The pain of childbearing, the pains of being a mother. So this, we have to understand, this really is part of the biblical understanding of Mary as the new Eve. I also would argue that it has to be understood, this is not just Catholic mumbo-jumbo. The Orthodox theology believes this, and the early Protestant reformers believed this also, that Mary is the new Eve. Tied into this understanding of Mary being the new Eve is really where we also get the idea of the Immaculate Conception. Now, many people, even unfortunately many Catholics, still believe that the Immaculate Conception refers to the conception, the pure conception of Jesus. That is not what it is. The Immaculate Conception is the Church's teaching that Mary is conceived without the stains of original sin. Why does the Church believe this? Because what the Church's understanding is that all of us, because of the fall of man, all of us have what's known as disordered temptation. Disordered temptation means that we all desire to do jacked up sins. Not just sins where we're going to misuse the good, but jacked up stuff. So when you look at Jesus, Jesus was tempted in all ways, but without sin. But he's tempted in ordered temptation, not disordered temptation. What do I mean by that? Adam and Eve, before they sinned, before they took from the fruit, could they be tempted? Yeah. Could they sin? Well, yeah, because they did sin, right? But what could they be tempted with? They could only be tempted with ordered temptation. Satan offers them fruit, right? It looks good. Looks pleasing to the eyes, the Bible says, looks good for eating. Is there anything wrong with eating something that looks good? No. No, that in and of itself is not a sin. It's not a sin to want to eat good food. That's not a sin. It was a sin because God told them not to do it. But there's nothing just jacked up about eating food. Satan offered them wisdom. He said, if you eat this, you're going to have wisdom. Is there anything wrong with wanting wisdom? No, wisdom is good, right? I mean, wisdom, we should all want wisdom. If you listen to this podcast, you're probably going to get less wisdom than you would like. But we all want wisdom. Wisdom is not bad in and of itself. What made it wrong was just because God told them, don't eat from this tree. That's what made it a sin. So Adam and Eve had the ability to sin, but it was still an ordered temptation to sin. What we see is once they eat from the fruit, once they take from this fruit, what's happening to them is picture a fire. Fire is good, right? Fire heats your homes. Fire, helps you cook. Fire runs your car. Fire's involved with everything, right? Fire's good. If you give a torch to a 2-year-old, well, that's probably not going to work out that good. Why? Because fire, we understand, is something that we have to control. It could be a very good source of goodness. There's nothing wrong with fire in and of itself, but we can misuse it. And if you give too much fire to somebody who is not ready to handle it, it's going to be bad. The reason God doesn't want Adam and Eve to eat from this, this fruit of this tree of knowledge of good and evil is because the human nature is limited in what it can grasp. We are not these infinite beings that can just grasp and understand all knowledge. This is why when we have theological talks, we really have to make sure we're being humble, because we have to realize we're limited in our minds. The Catechism of the Catholic Church is very clear. Like when we go to speak about theology, like we got to understand, like we don't even have the correct words in any language to really emphasize and to really describe the things of God. Our human brains are limited. Our human language is limited. When Adam and Eve partake of this wisdom, it's too much for them. And what it does is picture if you lift it up, you try to deadlift way too much weight and your legs snap and your back breaks. What happened is they receive this knowledge and it's too much. And what it does is it, instead of bringing more wisdom to their mind, it deforms their mind. Immediately, Adam and Eve look at each other. They were standing naked 5 minutes ago with no problem. All of a sudden, they're looking at each other and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm naked. They feel shame. They feel guilt. Why? Because they understand they can use each other. They can use each other in a bad way. They can be used in a bad way. They feel guilt, shame. They're able to understand lust outside of love. And it messes with their head. They immediately try to clothe themselves. At this point, what has happened is Adam and Eve went from just a ordered temptation to now they will wrestle with disordered temptation. That disordered temptation is passed down immediately to their offspring. Proof of this is their first kids are Cain and Abel. Immediately, Cain's like, oh, I could take this bet. You know what? I bet you I could crush my brother's skull. Yeah, I could do that. Immediately, hey, let's kill people. Wouldn't that be nice? There's nothing good in killing. There's nothing like, it's not like wisdom or fruit that's pleasing to the eyes. This is a disordered temptation. And humans wrestle with this. They have the disordered temptation to rape people, to abort babies, to kidnap people, to torture people. This is why we have suicide bombers. We have people who shoot up schools. We have people who beat their wives. Why? Because the human being is a jacked up person. And I hate to tell you, if you disagree with me, then you're pretty much rejecting all of Western Christian theology. Sometimes we as humans want to do bad stuff just for the sake of doing bad things. And that's just it. It's a disordered temptation. When you look at the New Testament, Jesus is tempted with what? Jesus is tempted with food. There's nothing disordered about that. Jesus is tempted with, Satan offers him power and authority. There's nothing wrong with having authority. There's nothing wrong with having power. Jesus is tempted with, hey, God's going to protect you. So go ahead. You could jump and God will protect you. There's nothing wrong with trusting in God. All of these things were wrong in the way that Satan wanted to present him and what Satan wanted out of return. But there was nothing disordered in those temptations of Jesus. Even Jesus' greatest temptation is to not die. When Peter's like, oh, you don't have to die. Never. It won't happen. We'll fight with you. Right in Matthew 16, this is right after Jesus gives him the keys, and Jesus has to say, get behind me, Satan. Why? Because that sounds good, right? It sounds good. Oh my gosh, yeah, you're right. I don't have to die. Man, wouldn't that be nice? Can you imagine if they didn't torture me? And we see Jesus wrestle with this in the Garden of Gethsemane, 3 times. Father, if it can, let this cup pass from me. But not my will be done, but your will. Just like Adam wrestled with Satan in the garden and failed, now Jesus has to wrestle with Satan in the garden, but Jesus prevails. But this has to be understood as ordered temptation. All the church is saying about Mary is that, again, we're saying, listen, there's only 4 people that were born without disordered temptation. The first Adam and the first Eve are created originally without disordered temptation. Makes sense, right? You can't deny that. That's not something that can be denied. It's a proof of fact. They did not have the stains of original sin when they were created. They had the ability to sin, but they weren't jacked up. This is why they walked around naked. They felt good. They felt, hey, you're naked. I'm naked. Yeah, I feel good about it. Honestly, I feel good. Nothing wrong. And as soon as they eat the fruit and they have disorder temptation, then they're like, you know what? I should probably put some leaves on this thing. You should probably put some leaves over there. Yeah, because this is embarrassing. They feel guilt. They feel shame. So if we know that the first Adam and the first Eve did not have disorder temptation in their creation, the only thing that the church is saying is like, since it's crystal clear that Jesus is the new Adam, and we know he didn't have disorder temptation, the only thing that the church is saying is that Mary is, as the new Eve, in this ability to receive Christ inside of her, to be able to say yes to God's will with nothing in it for her, that Mary is somehow protected and redeemed, because the church believes she is redeemed. She did need a Savior. She's redeemed by Christ, by his merits, just before he's born. It's in this very unique way. And that's all the church is teaching. So that when Christ was born inside Mary, where Eve says no to the will of God, Mary says, yes, let it be done to me as it is your will. And now what the church is just saying is that, yeah, there's a new Adam, there's a new Eve. There was an old Adam, there was an old Eve. Old Adam, old Eve, not created with the stain of original sin, which means this disordered temptation. The only other people are the new Adam and the new Eve. These, that they are not, they do not come to be. Jesus is not created. Jesus becomes incarnate in the Virgin Mary, but the new Adam and the new Eve are just able to, they take the place of the first Adam and the first Eve, and they just do things right that brings salvation. Jesus dies for the sins of the whole world, right? To bring salvation to everybody, and Mary's heart gets stabbed so that the thoughts of many might be revealed. Okay? So we're going to end that part with Mary. We're going to have to probably do this in a couple episodes. So this is Mary as the new Eve. And I hope that this makes sense. I hope that so far you're seeing like what the church believes about Mary and what the church doesn't believe about Mary, that some people believe that the church believes about Mary. So, all right, guys, thanks for watching. We'll be back with our next thing about Mary as the new Ark of the Covenant. So don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and don't forget to brush your teeth every day, even twice after meals.